The opening sequence of any manga's first chapter is an important thing because it sets the tone for the rest of the series and is often the reason people choose to continue reading. Kentaro Miura was aware of this fact when he was writing the Black Swordsman Chapter, which is probably why he chose to kick it off the way he did. Though the only official succubus of Berserk was killed within a few pages of her introduction, she went on to have a profound impact on the series. Not only did she expose the true fragility of the apostles, she also connected the prelude arc with the main series by eating one of Guts' closest comrades during the Eclipse. We didn't know it at the time, but that very first panel of Berserk isn't Guts taking pleasure, it's Guts preparing for revenge. That too for a man who hated him in their time together. Still, the female apostle continues to fascinate the Berserk community, so in this video, we're going to be breaking down her entire existence with a strong focus on her anatomy. The most stone-faced succubus of all time. Female apostle in her base form. For a series that heavily features demon and demonology and is often accused of being overtly sexual for the heck of it, Berserk sure has a dearth of succubi. You'd think if Miura was a sex-obsessed fiend that he would flood his creation with the most popular interpretation of a female demon. But as this setup probably told you guys, that wasn't the case. In fact, the entirety of Berserk features a single out-and-out succubus, and it's this one. The female apostle is often described as being the unidentified apostle because she doesn't exactly have a name. But if you were to stop any Berserk fan and ask them who this unidentified female might be, they'll point you towards this apostle 9 times out of 10. That's the kind of impact she's had on the story and the community despite appearing in a grand total of 4 pages, and we think it has a lot to do with her design and her MO. Most succubi have some sort of seduction ritual that involves them getting their targets to lower their guards entirely. In Greek mythology, you hear tales of the sirens, whose beautiful voices lure seamen to their shores, never to be heard from again. And, incidentally, folklore suggests that they go after seamen for their disgusting wordplay aside, that actually is believed to be the true aim of succubus because it's said that they end up draining the life force of the men they sleep with, or they end up outright killing them. Even the Pope isn't safe from their caress, as many in the 11th century believed that Pope Sylvester II had laid with a succubus named Meridiana, or that he'd made a deal with the devil himself. Of course, this might have just been a way to discredit the man, for he brought in various scientific and dogmatic advances to the Catholic Church, most notably introducing the decimal system to the West. But the fact that many bought the idea that he'd been influenced by a succubus just tells you how willing people were to believe in them. Sin takes various forms, but the most common form it takes is lust. Not all men can indulge their avarice, but all men and women can indulge their lust endlessly if they wish to do so. The idea of a succubus gained ground because of this basic truth, and there are many variations in their attack patterns across different myth and folklore. In some, they attack people in their sleep, in others they do so in broad sunlight, using music or even dance, based on the culture they originate from. But Berserk's succubus general is different in that she doesn't do any of these things. She just gets straight to the point. When Guts meets her in the Black Swordsman chapter, they're already mid-act for us to figure out how things got to that point. But then, during the Eclipse, we see the female put her moves on Corcus, and it's downright chilling the way she goes about it. Towards the end of chapter 80, as the rest of the Falcons are being torn to pieces by apostles, Corcus decides to run away from the eye of the storm. He runs and runs and runs and covers quite a distance before stopping to catch his breath. He thinks to himself that everything about the Eclipse, everything about his life after his first meeting with Griffith, had to be nothing but a dream. Corcus's mind clearly couldn't take the horrific reality of what was unfolding around him, which is why he asked no questions about a beautiful naked woman standing in the hellscape, opening her arms up to him and beckoning him to embrace her. If he could just tighten his loosening grip on sanity, he'd have realized that he was right and it was too good to be true, finding a beautiful and willing blonde in the midst of all this bloodshed. But he couldn't, and it spelled disaster for him. The woman, though coy about showing her breasts, was clearly there to entice him into a sexual encounter, because why else would she be completely naked? A succubus reels in her mark by tempting him, and that's exactly what she was doing here. Though she had a playful smile stuck to her face, her eyes revealed the coldness behind that emotion, because when you saw just how lifeless they were, you realized that she didn't really want intimacy at all. All she wanted was for men to fall into her trap so that she could kill and eat them without resistance, and unfortunately for Corcus, that's exactly what ends up happening to him. The female doesn't laugh, doesn't change her voice or alter her expression in any way, she remains completely stone-faced until Corcus falls for it. Then she reveals her true form, and to call it horrifying would be an understatement. She would give the xenomorph queen nightmares. The female apostle's released form and kill strategy. The female apostle's released form is one of the most unsettling apostle transformations in the entire franchise, simply because of the intimacy of the act that precedes her taking said form. With Corcus, she didn't have to engage in sex because he was already too far gone mentally. This succubus doesn't seduce men to store their semen inside herself and birth demonic entities at a later date, neither does she haunt their dreams and turn them into her thralls. She simply wants to have the quickest meal possible, and sex is an extremely easy way for her to get it. No matter how principled a person is, the sight of a naked woman giving herself up to him isn't something most men can resist, which meant all the female had to do was to find the right target and look pretty enough for him. Once he decided to take her and made advances towards her, she would hold his body down with her immense apostle strength and savor their time together as she devoured him bit by bit. Kentaro Miura was heavily inspired by the Alien franchise for his series. He created numerous iterations on facehuggers and chest splitters in his own work, and every chance he got to make an Alien reference, he did so unabashedly. The female apostle is one of those references in our eyes because her release state would give the xenomorph queen nightmares. In Alien lore, a xenomorph and a predator cannot biologically mate with one another, which means that any hybrids are genetically engineered. Not only that, they're considered to be abominations because for many predators, hunting down an alien is a rite of passage, and mixing blood with them is highly taboo. Still, pred-alien queens do exist in the overall canon of the franchise, and from that perspective, female apostle is also an abomination. Despite being a demon, she retains a couple of aspects of her human self, the most prominent of which are her breasts. The female has an extremely taut and toned physique in her human form, which serves her well as a luring mechanism for unwitting males. But when she has them in her clutches, she has no reason to keep any aspect of her human appearance. She keeps her torso unchanged because in most cases, it's what gets her food, and she probably doesn't want to cover up her bread maker. We should also mention that though a succubus is said to target humans for breeding, that isn't the female apostle's purpose, simply because apostles can't procreate. They can only be created with the use of a behelit, so even if she is collecting the souls and semen of the men she kills, she's not really doing anything with it, which makes her approach even worse. The other aspect of her physique that remains unchanged is the upper half of her face, which is just as cold and inhuman as it was before she activated demonic release. The rest of her entire body goes through such an intense transformation that sometimes it's hard reconciling both forms as belonging to her. The female apostle's true body sees her blonde hair replaced by a bunch of tentacles and appendages that don't match one another, but look terrifying all the same. Two thick and massive entomological abdomens extend out of the nape of her neck, and they're surrounded by a bunch of bulbous tendrils, some of which look like limp elephant trunks. Her hair becomes spiky and appendage-like as well, with two of them looking like rudimentary arms. She also grows a pair of useless wings from the back of her skull, and we call them useless because look at their size. And then look at hers. There's no way those things could support her body weight, aerodynamically speaking. Her stature increases to the point that she's twice Guts' size, and grown men look like adolescents in her embrace. Her abdomen sprouts abs from out of nowhere, while her arms and legs become longer, greener, taloned, and brindled, like a reptile's skin. By far, the most disturbing aspect of her appearance is her mouth, which is twice the size of her upper head and fanged exactly like a xenomorph's. We're glad that female apostle's tongue doesn't have a second jaw on it because, honestly, we don't think we'd have the heart to talk about what that kind of seduction would look like. Guts would have probably died within seconds if she could headbite, so in a way, we're actually glad her tongue is more like a tail and not a second set of jaws. It's not like she needs the help, because one set is enough for her needs and purposes. Once the female has used her human form to entice men, she unleashes her demon form and devours them on the spot, mid-copulation, kinda like a praying mantis. In Corcus' case, we don't see his actual death, but we do see the aftermath of it as the female parades his severed head, keeping it visible from inside her mouth. She doesn't eat it because, like the rest of her kin, she wants to mentally torture Guts as much as possible before eating him as well. Skull Knight puts a damper on those plans, as does her newly born master Femto, but the female does get a chance to make things right a couple of years later. At some point during his travels as the Black Swordsman, Guts comes across her and lets himself be taken by her. Now, for most men, this would mean certain death. The female's jaws pack enough biting force to rip heads clean off, and her grip is powerful enough to not allow anything to escape it. Guts practically walked into a death trap when he decided to sleep with her, but turns out that was part of his plan. Her MO is what killed her. How Guts turned the tables on the female apostle. So the female apostle's MO is pretty clear. She uses her body to lure men to secluded areas so she can kill them and devour them like any apostle worth their salt. Usually this works out because the men are so lost in the feeling of pleasure that they don't even notice her transform until it's too late. But with Guts, things were different. If the female apostle were a dead spirit or even a possessed body, she could have sensed his brand of sacrifice and become aware of his true nature. But she must have been real hungry because she took him in without even figuring out who he was. This proves disastrous for her because, as fate would have it, this was no chance encounter. Guts' brand reacts to the presence of apostles by bleeding profusely in their presence. He uses the pain it produces to track them down and eliminate them from existence. He must have done the same with the female, and once he realized what her deal was, he figured he'd get no better opportunity. Sleeping with an apostle isn't a decision he could have made lightly, considering he still had Casca in his life. In fact, there are many people who look at the opening frames of Berserk as being semi-non-canonical because at that time, Miura still hadn't invented Casca. But here's the thing, even within canon, Guts' decision to clap some demon cheeks makes sense because he doesn't do it out of a sense of lust. The female apostle's MO is tempting men into sleeping with her before trapping and killing them. Guts had fought enough apostles by this point in his life to know nothing was easy when it came to them. His brand would have told him that this woman was a target, but her behavior is what created his window of opportunity. Like we mentioned a few seconds ago, apostles can't exactly sense the brand of sacrifice, they can only see it, and by the time most of them see Guts' brand, they're already dying. This gives him the perfect opportunity to ambush them as he pleases, and when one of them takes him into a secluded region, it's even better for his plan. At the start of the series, the female apostle thinks that she triumphed over Guts the moment he gave in to temptation. She transforms mid-coupling, as is her way, and tells the fool that she's giving him one last taste of heaven before she sends him to hell. The female has done this countless times before, and she knows what comes next. She eats meal, end of story. Except with Guts, the sex was only the beginning. As soon as she taunted him, instead of flinching away like Corcus, Guts grabbed her face with his good hand and held it down. He then shoved her nasty tongue back in her mouth with his metal arm and stuck it in her gullet. Guts informed the female that she was the one who was trapped, except he didn't do it politely, and he gave her a face full of gunpowder immediately after. As he wrapped his clothes around him, the Black Swordsman looked down on the burning remains of his latest conquest, and we saw the female apostle's body sporting a giant hole in the ribcage area thanks to Guts' arm cannon. Most apostles can't be harmed by traditional human weapons, but heavy weaponry like cannons and Dragon Slayer were effective against them. Still, most of them wouldn't die due to a single cannon shot, which tells you that while the female was pretty strong, she wasn't on par with her peers. Yes, her strategy to increase the number of souls within the abyss was pretty foolproof, but she failed to consider the concept of the prey becoming the predator. She was so preoccupied with eating Guts that she didn't wait to think that he could be the infamous Black Swordsman known for hunting apostles. He was wearing a black coat and traveling with a giant-ass fantasy sword for Pete's sake. How blinded by lust do you have to be to miss that? Turns out very blinded is the answer because in the end, the female's MO is what got her killed, and in doing so, Guts also avenged Corcus, even though they never quite got along with each other. Marvelous verdict! Unfortunately, that's it for this video. The female apostle is a fan favorite for reasons that are probably obvious by now, so before you move on to another video, why don't you tell us what you think about her in the comments down below? We'd really want to know your thoughts. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already, but for now, this is Wizard Wheezy signing off. We'll see you guys in the next one, and until then, don't forget, keep on struggling, strugglers.